I never meant to go into his room. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else, because what happened next changed every single thing about my life, and it all started with one stupid, careless mistake on a Tuesday afternoon in October. My name is Daniel. I was 22 years old, a junior at a state university in Michigan. I had been sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Caleb for exactly 47 days. I know the exact number because I had been counting. Not because I liked counting, not because I was organized or meticulous. I had been counting because every single day living with Caleb was its own kind of quiet, slow, beautiful torture that I could not explain to anyone, least of all to myself. But we'll get to that first. The Tuesday. The careless mistake. The thing I found Caleb had left for his Thursday afternoon chemistry lab, which actually ran on Tuesdays because his professor had a scheduling conflict at the start of semester. This is important. I knew his schedule. I had memorized it without meaning to, the way you memorize a song that plays in every store you walk into. 8 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, his alarm would go off, and I would lie in my bed next door and listen to the sound of him moving around. The creak of the floorboard near his closet, the rush of the shower, the specific rhythm of his footsteps down the hallway. I knew when he made coffee because I could hear the particular clatter of our shared coffee maker, and I knew he took it black because I had seen his mug 100 times and there was never any creamer involved. And I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand that I was not snooping. I simply paid attention. There is a difference. At least, that is what I told myself. So, Tuesday, Caleb was gone. I had a paper due on Thursday for my American literature course, a 15-page analysis of loneliness in John Steinbeck's writing that I had not started, and I was procrastinating in the way that only truly stressed college students can procrastinate, which is to say, I had cleaned the entire kitchen, reorganized the pantry, wiped down the bathroom mirror, and was now standing in the hallway looking for literally anything else to do instead of opening my laptop. And that is when I noticed Caleb's door was open, not wide open, just ajar, just slightly, the way a door swings when the latch does not catch all the way, and I would have walked past it. I want to be very clear that I would have walked right past it, except that on the floor, just inside the door, clearly having slid off his desk and landed there sometime that morning, was a library book. I recognized it immediately. Not the title, but the color, deep burgundy with gold. Lettering, because it was from the university library. And I had checked out books from that same library, and I knew that if the book was not returned on time, the fines added up aggressively. I was a person who cared about library fines, perhaps more than a normal person should, because I had once paid $14 in fines during my freshman year, and the experience had genuinely haunted me. So, pushed the door open a little more, leaned in, and picked up the book, and I saw the title, and my entire body went very still. The book was called Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin now. Maybe you know this book. Maybe you know exactly what it is and what it means and why my hands went slightly unsteady, holding it there in the doorway of my roommate's bedroom. But if you don't, let me tell you. Giovanni's Room is one of the most important novels in LGBTQ literary history. It is a story about a young American man in Paris who falls in love with an Italian bartender named Giovanni. And it is a story about shame and desire and what happens when a person cannot accept who they are. James Baldwin wrote it in 1956, and it was groundbreaking and devastating and beautiful, and it was the kind of book that people read for very specific reasons. And my roommate Caleb Tall. Quiet, dark-haired Caleb who played acoustic, guitar on weekend mornings, and always held the elevator and never talked about anyone he was dating or had dated or wanted to date. My roommate Caleb had been reading it, set the book back on his desk very carefully, exactly where I imagined it had been before it fell. I walked back out into the hallway. I pulled his door until it was exactly as ajar as it had been before, and then I went to my room, sat down at my desk, and did not write a single word of my Steinbeck paper for the rest of the afternoon. Because here is the thing that I had not told anyone. Not my friends from home, not my friends at school, not my parents, not anyone on this earth. I was gay, and I had been in love with my roommate since approximately the third day of living with him. When I watched him sitting cross-legged on the living room floor at 11 o'clock at night, surrounded by organic chemistry flashcards, eating cereal directly from the ID box and reading his notes with an expression of such intense concentration that I had to physically turn away and pretend to look for something in the refrigerator, because I did not know what else to do with what I was feeling. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday. It was the longest day of my life. I went to class. I sat through an 80-minute lecture on post-Reconstruction American poetry. I ate a sandwich I did not taste. I came home. Caleb was in the kitchen making pasta, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up, even though we were indoors. And he said, "Hey," and I said, "Hey," and we had the deeply unremarkable roommate exchange that we had every single day. And I sat at the kitchen table and pretended to check my phone while actually staring at the side of his face and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with any of this information. The logical part of my brain, which was functional but frequently outvoted, said, "You don't actually know anything." Giovanni's Room is a classic American novel. It is on plenty of reading lists. English professors assign it. Book clubs read it. People read it for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with their own identity. The other part of my brain, the part that had memorized his schedule and noticed the way he laughed a little quieter when it was just the two of us than when other people were around, said, "You know? You know, and you have known for weeks, and the only question now is what you are going to do about it." I did nothing. For 3 more days, I did absolutely nothing. I should tell you more about Caleb, because this story is as much his as it is mine, and I want to do him justice. Caleb Marcus had grown up in a small town in rural Ohio, the kind of town where the high school football team was the center of civic life and where everybody knew it's everybody and everybody's business. He had one younger sister named Lily who texted him memes at all hours of the day, which I knew because I had heard his phone going off with a sound like a cartoon BOing at 2 in the morning on more than one occasion, and he would laugh quietly in his room, alone, at whatever she had sent him. And that small, private sound was one of the things that made my chest ache in a way I could not fully explain. He was a biochemistry major on a pre-med track, which meant his life was essentially an endless series of exams and lab reports and MACAT prep, which he approached with a calm, focused determination that I deeply admired because I was an English major and my relationship with deadlines was considerably more chaotic. He was not unfriendly. He was just quiet in the specific way of someone who has learned to take up the exact amount of space they need, and not 1 inch more. He had one close friend that I had met, a guy named Tomas, who came over sometimes on Friday evenings, and they would play video games in Caleb's room with the door open. And sometimes I would wander past on my way to the kitchen, and Tomas would shout something at me about joining them, and Caleb would look over his shoulder and say, "Yeah," come on in a tone that was genuinely inviting without being pushy. And sometimes I did join them, and those were honestly some of the best Friday evenings of my college experience. The 3 of us crammed onto the small couch in Caleb's room, controllers in hand. Someone's pizza getting cold on the desk. He liked music that I didn't always know. He would sometimes put on a playlist through his small Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen while he cooked. And occasionally I would ask who something was and he would tell me. And then later, I would look them up alone in my room. This is how I started listening to Sufjan Stevens, which is either a blessing or a curse, depending on the day. He was kind. That was the thing underneath all the other things. He was quiet and private and did not overshare and had firm boundaries around his own space. But he was also genuinely, consistently kind in ways that were not performed for anyone's benefit. He noticed when I seemed stressed, and he would sometimes just put a mug of tea on the kitchen counter near me without saying anything. He had once, during the third week of the semester, helped me look for my phone for 40 minutes when I was convinced I had left it in my car and was spiraling about it. And it turned out the phone was in my own jacket pocket. And instead of making me feel stupid about it, he had just said, "I've done that." I was absolutely, completely, thoroughly gone for this person, and now I knew, or thought I knew, something about him that changed the entire geometry of my situation. The Saturday after the Tuesday came a party. It was at Tomas's apartment, 2 blocks away, the kind of college party that is maybe 30 people in a space designed for 8. With music slightly too loud for the conversation level and beer in red cups and someone always blocking the bathroom. I went because Caleb was going, and Caleb had mentioned it at dinner on Friday and looked up when he said it in a way that felt like an invitation, even though he hadn't technically said come. With me, I told myself I would not do anything with what I knew. I told myself I was just going to the party to be social, to behave normally, to stop reading library book spines like they were secret messages written specifically for me. We walked together because we lived together. And it would have been bizarre to not walk together. And the 2 blocks took maybe 4 minutes. And I spent all 4 of those minutes in a state of internal chaos, while externally making conversation about weather. Tomas usually had good parties verdict. Usually yes, sometimes chaotic. Once involving a minor kitchen fire that was under control within 60 seconds. The party was exactly as advertised. Loud, warm, crowded. Someone had made a playlist that was mostly nostalgic early 2000s pop, and people kept shouting the lyrics. Caleb and I split up naturally in the way you do at parties, circulating into different conversations. And I spent an hour talking to people from my literature seminar and occasionally locating Caleb across the room with the focused, involuntary precision of a compass finding north. And then something happened that I did not expect. There was a guy named Ryan at this party. Ryan was a grad student, mid-20s, studying environmental science. And he was funny and confident in a way that filled up a room. And he was talking to Caleb in the corner near the bookshelf. And as the evening went on, they were talking less and less to anyone else and more to each other. And Ryan was, unmistakably, visibly, without any ambiguity whatsoever, flirting with Caleb. I know what flirting looks like. I had spent years observing it from the outside. The specific language of tilted bodies and maintained eye contact and the way laughter sounds. When it's being performed slightly for someone's benefit, Ryan was doing all of it directly at my roommate, and Caleb quiet, contained. Careful Caleb was smiling, not his polite smile, not his I am being socially functional smile, a real one. The one that reached the corners of his eyes and made him look younger and easier in a way I had seen only a handful of times in our 6 weeks of living together. I went to get another drink I didn't need. I stood in the kitchen for a few minutes talking to someone about registration for spring semester. And when I came back, Ryan had his hand on Caleb's arm, and Caleb had not moved away from it. I went home at 11:15. I told Caleb I was tired, which was true in the sense that I was exhausted down to the level of my bones, just not from the reasons a normal person would be tired. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully read and said, "Okay, I'll see you later," and I nodded and left. I walked home alone in 40-degree October air and thought, very clearly and for the first time, that I needed to get honest with myself about what I was doing, because here was the situation. As clearly as I could see it, I was in love with my roommate. I was not out to anyone. I had been not out so long and so successfully that being not out had started to feel like a personality trait, which is perhaps the most depressing sentence I have ever thought about myself. My roommate might possibly be gay. I had evidence that was suggestive, but not conclusive. A library book, and a conversation at a party with a man who was possibly just a friendly extrovert. And even if he was gay, that told me exactly nothing about whether he had any interest in me. Because gay people are not interested in all other gay people any more than straight people are interested in all other straight people. And the idea that shared identity creates attraction is a misunderstanding so fundamental it should have its own category. And we were roommates. We lived together. We shared a kitchen and a bathroom and a living room. And if anything went wrong between us, we would still have to come home to the same apartment every single day until May. By the time I got back to our apartment and unlocked the door and took off my shoes in the entryway, I had talked myself into a very calm and rational decision to simply do nothing, to continue as I had been, to keep my feelings where I had kept them, which was carefully organized in a box in the back of my chest where they could not cause any damage to anything. This decision lasted approximately 9 days. The thing that undid it was not a dramatic moment. It was not a movie-style confrontation or a midnight confession or anything that would make a satisfying 3-act structure. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was in the kitchen doing dishes. And Caleb came in and sat at the table and opened his laptop. And after about 5 minutes of silence, he said, "Without looking up, can I ask you something kind of personal?" I turned off the water. I turned around. "Yeah," I said. Sure, he was looking at his laptop screen, but he wasn't reading it. He was doing the thing where you look at something so you don't have to look at the person you're talking to. I know this thing because I do it constantly. Did you think Ryan was flirting with me at Tomas's party? The universe, very politely, chose this moment to hold its breath. "Yes," I said. "I think he was." Caleb nodded slowly. He closed his laptop a little, not all the way. "Okay," he said, and then neither of us said anything for a long time. And I don't know what made me do what I did next. I genuinely cannot explain it as a rational decision. All I know is that I dried my hands on the dish towel, and I walked to the table, and I sat down across from him, and I said, "Did you want him to be?" Caleb finally looked up. He looked at me for a long moment, and his expression was careful and a little afraid, and also something else. Something underneath the careful and afraid, and he said, "I don't know how to answer that." "That's okay," I said, and I meant it. He looked back down at his laptop. "I don't really talk about this stuff," he said. "With anyone?" "I know," I said.
Me either. He looked up again.
Something shifted in his face. Yeah, I said. We sat there in the kitchen for another moment, and then something between us changed in a way that was both enormous and completely quiet. The way a lot of the most important things are not a thunderclap, but a door opening into a room you didn't know was there. "Don't know what I'm doing," Caleb said finally. "With any of this, at all." "Neither do I," I said. "That's actually kind of reassuring," he said. "I shouldn't be," I said. "We're both disasters," and he laughed. His real laugh, not the social one. And I laughed too, and that was it. That was the beginning. It was not fast after that. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. Nothing about where we went from that kitchen table conversation was sudden or easy or clean. We were two people who had both spent years being carefully, methodically private about something central to who we were, and that kind of long habit does not dissolve in a single evening. But things shifted. Small things at first. We started talking more, staying in the kitchen later after dinner. The conversation wandering through subjects that felt more real than the surface-level roommate exchanges we'd been having. He told me about growing up in Ohio, the specific weight of a small town where everyone's eyes are on you and certain subjects simply do not exist. I told him about high school, about the careful performance of being normal that had taken so much energy I'd sometimes gone entire weekends. Barely leaving my room, he had never said the word out loud to another person. I want you to understand what that means, what it costs, how much space that takes up in a person over years and years of carrying it. He was 22 years old and he had never once said the word to describe himself to another human being. I had said it exactly once, to a mirror at age 17 and then not again. We said it to each other on a Sunday afternoon in November. Sitting on the living room floor with our backs against the couch, some documentary playing on the TV that neither of us was watching, it didn't feel like a thunderclap when we said it. It felt more like putting down something very heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten you were carrying it. There was a week after that where things were slightly strange between us. Not bad strange, but tender strange. The way things sometimes get when something true has been said and all the air is different, and you don't quite know how to move around in it yet. We were both figuring out what we were to each other now. What category this fit into. Whether the thing I felt and was pretty sure he felt was going to be something we walked toward or something we carefully stepped around. He figured it out first. On a Friday in November, Tomas had come over and they played video games for a while, and then Tomas left around 9 and Caleb knocked on my door, which he had not done before, and asked if I wanted to watch something. Just like that simple, his voice completely even, like it wasn't anything. Like he hadn't thought about it at all, even though I would later learn he'd been working up to it for 4 days. I said yes. We watched a film. Sitting on the couch with a reasonable amount of space between us, and then another film because neither of us wanted to move, and the credits rolled, and neither of us spoke for a minute. And then he said, very quietly, to the middle distance of the living room, "I think about you a lot." I said, "I know. I mean, me too. About you." And he turned and looked at me, and I looked at him, and we were close enough that everything was very clear. Every detail of his face in the low lamplight of the living room. And he said, "I don't know what I'm doing." "You said that before," I said. "Still true." "Me either," I said. "Still." And he reached over and took my hand. That was all. He just reached over and took my hand and held it, not like a movie. Not with any of the trappings that the word romantic conjures. Just two people sitting on a couch with their hands linked, which is such a small physical thing and also one of the most profound things I have ever experienced, because his hand was warm and certain in mine, and the feeling was not like falling, which is the word people use. It was more like arriving somewhere I had been trying to find for a very long time. We sat like that for a long time, without either of us saying anything, and eventually I put my head on his shoulder, and he adjusted slightly so the angle was more comfortable, and we stayed there until we both fell asleep and woke up at 3. In the morning, slightly stiff and not moving. Apart the next morning was Saturday, and we made breakfast together, which we had done before but felt different now in a way that was new and a little delicate, and also full of a warmth I didn't have good words for. He made eggs and I made toast, and he bumped into me at the stove and apologized, and I said it was fine, and we were both smiling about nothing, which is one of my favorite memories of my entire life. I should tell you that it was not simple even after that. That there was a conversation we needed to have about what we were doing and what we wanted and what this meant. And that conversation was awkward, and imperfect and also necessary. And in it we said things that were true and slightly scary, and we both admitted to feelings that had been building since early in the semester, since before the book, before the party. And we talked about the fact that we lived together and what that meant if things were good and also if things were ever not good. And we decided together, carefully, to take things slowly, to not rush anything, to let whatever this was grow at a pace that felt safe and true rather than at the pace of feeling, which is too fast and too total to be trusted entirely. We were good at slow. As it turned out, both of us had spent years being slow and careful with ourselves and with the things that mattered. And that quality, which had been protective and also isolating, turned out to be exactly what this thing between us needed. I called my best friend from home in December. Her name was Maya, and she was one of the only people from high school I was still genuinely close with. And I told her I needed to tell her something, and she said okay, and I told her. I was gay, and there was a silence that lasted less than 2 seconds. And then she said, I love you and thank you for telling me. And also, can I be honest with you? I sort of thought so in 10th grade. And I laughed until my eyes went wet, and she said, tell me everything. And I told her everything. It was the first time I had told anyone other than Caleb. Caleb told Tomas in January. When we had been officially together, I am using that word deliberately, because we had chosen it carefully, together for about 6 weeks. Tomas did not seem entirely surprised either, which, it turns out, is a common experience among people who spent years thinking they were being perfectly opaque. Tomas hugged Caleb for a long time and said, I'm really happy for you, man, and then looked at me and said, you too, Daniel. Obviously, and we all stood in the kitchen for a moment in the particular emotional aftermath of a truth that has been said and landed gently. Right. Caleb told his sister Lily in February, by text first, because the words were easier to find when he had time to find them. And Lily called him 20 minutes later and talked to him for 2 hours and said things that made him cry in his room while I sat outside the door and waited. Not because he asked me to, but because I wanted to be nearby. Afterward, he opened the door and I was there, and he looked at me for a moment and then sat down. Next to me in the hallway, floor against the wall, and I put my arm around him and he leaned into my shoulder, and we sat there in the hallway of our apartment for a long time in the quiet. He told his parents over spring break, which he spent at home in Ohio. I was not there for this, obviously, and I spent that entire week in a state of anxious hypervigilance that was not good for my concentration or my sleep. He called me every evening, which was new. We had not been a daily phone call kind of people before, and the calls were longer as the week went on. His mother cried at first, not badly, more the kind of tears that mean a rearrangement is happening inside a person. And his father was quiet for a long time, and then said he loved him. And neither of those moments were perfect or uncomplicated, but they were also not the disaster that Caleb had been carrying the fear of for years. He came back from spring break, and I picked him up from the bus station, and when he got off the bus, he looked lighter. That is the only word I have for it. He looked like some specific gravity had shifted, I should tell you that. I did not have the coming out conversation with my parents until April, which was later than I wanted, but also exactly when I was ready. And that my mother said, we love you, and that doesn't change anything, and my father said. I figured something was different about this roommate, which was deeply embarrassing, and also, on reflection, funny. They have met Caleb since then. My father asked him approximately 45 questions about his MCAT prep, and my mother made his favorite meal based on a single offhand comment he made about liking roasted chicken, which is the most my mother thing that has ever happened. And Caleb held my hand at the dinner table in front of my parents for the first time, and I watched my mother's face when he did, and she just smiled at her plate, and my father pretended to be extremely interested in the salt shaker. I want to tell you what it feels like to be seen? Not to be seen in the abstract philosophical way people sometimes talk about, but in the particular daily way. To be known by someone who knew themselves first, who had done the work of reckoning with a truth they'd been afraid of, and who could therefore see you doing the same work and not flinch from it. Caleb never asked me to be more ready than I was. He never pushed me toward a timeline or made my slower pace feel like inadequacy. He had his own history of being slow and careful with himself, and he extended that same patience outward. I hope I gave him something similar. Hope that my willingness to sit outside a door and wait without needing anything from that moment was useful in some small way. We are still together. I know that is perhaps not the dramatic fact to land on, but it is the most important one. We finished that school year. We found a different apartment for our senior year together. Not by default, but by choice. Our first real choice out loud, and we have been in that apartment now for 7 months. And it is different from the first apartment in ways that are small and enormous all at once. Our names are both on the lease. We share a bedroom. There is a picture of us on the refrigerator, taken by Maya when she came to visit in September. The two of us on the couch looking sideways at each other while she said something ridiculous to make us laugh. And the picture caught us mid-laugh, not posed, not performing, just two people completely comfortable in the same space. And every time I see it, I feel something that I do not have a single word for. We talk about the future sometimes. Carefully, the way we do everything. But we talk about it. What comes after graduation? What does med school applications mean for geography? What my graduate school ideas might mean? We are 22 and 23, and we do not have to know exactly how any of it resolves. But we talk about it in the first person plural, which is a thing I did not know I had been waiting to do until I started doing it. There is a copy of Giovanni's room on our shared bookshelf now. I bought my own. His is there too, the library copy long since returned, replaced by a copy he bought at a second-hand store in February with a green sticker on the spine. They are next to each other. I did not arrange this on purpose, and I am fairly sure he didn't either. It just ended up that way. I think about the Tuesday in October a lot. The door that was slightly open. The book on the floor. The 47 days of careful, private solo feelings that led to the moment I was standing in. Someone else's doorway holding a library book about love and shame. And the catastrophic cost of not being honest about who you are. James Baldwin wrote Giovanni's room because he needed to, because the story needed to exist, because the particular silence around certain kinds of love needed to be broken with language, needed to be named and put on pages and handed to readers who would recognize something in it. I am not James Baldwin. I am a 22-year-old English major who found a book in my roommate's doorway and was changed by it in ways that had nothing to do with what was written on its pages and everything to do with what it helped me understand about the person who had been. Reading it about the person I had already, somewhere between day 3 and day 4, started to love. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. Being seen does not require being loud. It requires being honest, which is harder and quieter and takes longer. And the reward for it is not applause or resolution or even certainty, but something steadier than any of those things. It is two people in a kitchen making breakfast on a Saturday morning. Bumping into each other at the stove, it is a hand extended across a couch, held and not let go. It is learning to say a word out loud that you have been carrying silently for so long that the silence started to feel like who you were. And discovering that the word sounds like relief, it is the way he still makes tea and leaves it near me when I seem stressed, without saying anything, because he is a person who has always paid attention, who has always noticed, and now he knows that I know that. And I know that he knows I know. And in that mutual knowing, is something I used to think I did not get to have. I am Daniel. I am 22 years old. I am gay and in love, and my roommate's library book fell off his desk on a Tuesday in October, and nothing has been the same since. I would not change a single thing, not even the 47 days of quiet. Private torture? Not even the nights I lay in bed listening to the creak of the floorboard near his closet and feeling things I didn't know what to do with. Not even the Steinbeck paper I handed in 2 days late and got a C on. Okay, maybe that one a